Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and I'm back with Karen Charles, event specialist for Husqvarna Viking. Hello, Karen.
Hi.
And today, Karen is going to be showing us some amazing applique techniques, especially invisible applique techniques by machine. Correct?
Yes,
that can emulate the look of hand applique.
Yeah, that's my goal.
Okay.
And it's really started because I don't have the time. I love hand applique. And I love hand quilting, but I don't have the time for it anymore. So for me, it was all about trying to get the look of hand applique without having to spend the time. And I don't have the vision either for it these days. So this is a project I've been working on, and I'm kind of going to deconstruct it for you so you can see how it works. I think it's really pretty interesting. Some of it's sewn down, some of it's not. But you get an idea of where it's going. The best way of getting an image like this and finding out if you're happy with it is taking a photograph. If you take your phone, take a picture of it, somehow seeing it at a distance like that really gives you a different idea of what you like. And then you can pick things up and move things around. Now this flower was one that was done in embroidery. All the petals were separate and then added in and put together. And it's got a really unique look to it. But it's not your traditional applique. So I'm going to take those flowers off so you can see how things start to come apart. And we're going to put them aside. Now we have another flower here. You can see the design of it. It actually is a whole flower that I cut out of a fabric, which, you know, it still gives it a really nice look to it. And we've got all of these beautiful leaves. And I haven't done any work to them. They're just sitting there right now. But you can see that they actually are the designs in it. The fabric I used was something like this, and I'm sure you've been in a fabric store and looked at that and thought, it's beautiful, but what would I ever use it for? It's perfect for applique, because all I did was take a piece of fabric, and when you look at these, you'll see that there's no raw edges shown. It is a simple, easy technique of taking, this is called a fusible no-show mesh. It's a very lightweight, and what I did with it is I put a piece of that with my leaf, and then I sewed around it. Usually I don't even cut it out of my fabric. I'll have one big piece of fusible no-show mesh, and then my leaf fabric, and I'll just sew around all the ones that I want. And then I could have, all of these took me maybe, 4 or 5 minutes to do. Once I've done sewing them, then I have a little cut in the no-show mesh and turn them right side out, and all those seam allowances are magically turned to the inside. So I don't have to deal with that. It's really hard to do an invisible applique if you have a raw edge. That's where you see a lot of people using fusible, steam-a-seam, that type of thing, where they iron it right down. But then the things are stiff. They don't have that soft look that you get from a real hand applique. And so that's my goal, is to get that really, elegant look.
Where the quilt will still drape, so if you want to use it on a bed quilt, you're not going to run into that stiffness in certain areas.
So this is a little bit different. These are done in embroidery too, but they're three-dimensional techniques where they aren't even sewn together yet. They're just laid in place, and by kind of putting them where I want, I get an idea of whether I'm going to like them or not. When I'm done, all I'm going to do is open them up, sew it through the center, and then it's going to have its own dimension. For the reason that it curls up the way that it is I was using, it's called Fabric Magic. Pull it in over here. And instead of a regular stabilizer, this is a different kind of stabilizer. Once you've sewn it, I had a layer of fabric on the top and the bottom. When I finished working with it, I steamed it, and it goes, and it sucks up. And so you get that dimension happening to it, and you can get all kinds of really neat looks for it. So if you have an embroidery machine, there's a lot of fun, creative things that you can do. It's not the invisible applique that we're talking about, but you can see how quick and easy it is to do. This is a simple shape that I've brought into embroidery, and I filled my hoop with them. And afterwards, I had a piece that I cut out like this. You can see it. And when I cut off the bottom, then I was able to turn it right side out. And now I've got some really pretty creative three-dimensional petals. If I wanted them to be used in this place, you can see that's how this was done. I laid the petals down onto my surface like this, and I layered them and kept layering them. And then afterwards, I took the back, and all the petals were in here like this. I laid the back on, I sewed around, left an opening, and then flipped it so that this becomes my outside. It's all done, and I could use a pretty big...
Yeah.
That would be an interesting
lot
flower
of
on a
impact
quilt.
on that.
So there's a lot of ways of using embroidery for doing applique that still gives you a finished edge to what you're working with. Sometimes you can't even tell the difference. Now, another fabric, when you're looking at fabrics, this one has got a beautiful poppy flower. And so when I'm looking at flowers and fabrics, I try and choose something that gives me a sense of realness to it, where I see the shading. I might not use the whole flower by itself. I might just go around and choose a petal and then layer the petals together to give me the dimension. You'll see in a quilt coming up that I'm going to show you how that was done. But this is the same process. I can lay my fusible no-show mesh down. The shiny side goes inside, and then I'm going to sew around the edge. When I'm finished with that, just a regular straight stitch. I usually use a 2.0 stitch, nice and short. Then I turn it over, cut through here, and then flip it right side out. And it gives you your seam allowances. Now, as I start to pull things off, you can see there's another piece, and that's the way that was done.
And that's just a partial flower,
just a partial petal. So I could put a bunch of them together. Here's another one, and you can see where they're opened. The reason I do this mostly is just so that I can have that needle turn effect. If you're doing hand applique, you would turn the fabric under as you're going, and it would be a little bit more gradual. This is something where you can do it all at once, and it's very quick. It's all about time management.
Yes.
So we're going to just pull a few more of these pieces off. You can see here, this is a fabric. The flower is part of it. When you turn it over, I just used the fusible on that outside edge. I didn't really worry about it, because what the rest of that was is just filler to me. You know, if this was a real bouquet, I would have all of the shading of the leaves and everything before. I don't necessarily have to go in and piece that. It can just be in place, and then as I add things to it.
And you left this part raw because you knew you were going to be layering other flowers on top, and so that didn't bother you?
So as I go in, I could decide to put it here, or wherever I wanted it to. It's just going to cover it over, but I don't have to go in and put all those intricate little pieces in there. So we're going to pull them off.
Make your fabric work for you.
And you can see, that's the goal. You can see now that there's actually not a lot that's sewn down here. I have the start of a few petals in place, and I've got another independent petal. I don't know where that one's going to go, but I'm going to pull that off, and then we're going to look at all the leaves. Now this is a silk leaf. It came off of silk flowers, and it's absolutely beautiful. It has a real fabric feel to it and dimension, and it's got a lot of richness to it. So I thought I might work that in there too.
You haven't even done anything to it. You just took it off of the artificial
it had a bunch of these beautiful silk leaves to it, and I've got a whole bunch of them, and you can see it's soft and flexible, and it really would fit in here with the look and the color.
That's a great idea.
So now we're left with our base. This part is something sometimes people have trouble doing. They work with, a lot of times, very fine, what do you call it? I've lost it for a moment. Bias, and you know, to make your vines. But sometimes you want something that's a little bit narrower. So this is, believe it or not, just a piece of yarn. And it can be sewn down with a sewing machine, or it can be couched down with felting needles. And so then you have no stitching, it's just the felting. So I do a lot of felting. I'll just bring this over for a second. I do a lot of felting with a machine. And I also have a tool with my embroidery machine that uses a lot of felting. So these were done with embroidery, felted. These can easily be added to any quilt that I'm doing. And when you look at them, the needles are barbed. This is the tool, and it's one barb needle. So if you can imagine it being used for this purpose, that one needle felted this in place.
And it just embeds the fibers into your background fabric.
So any way that you know how to do it, it's great to do. The more invisible you want it, you can use all kinds of really creative yarns. You can go in circles, but because it's not fabric, it will sit down and lay really nice and flat. So I thought it was just a really nice base. So now let's look at this vase. this is where it gets to be really interesting. You cannot see any stitches that are hand done or machine done here. If you look at it very closely, if you look at the back, you'll see there is a machine stitch. I used a white.
Barely.
But you can barely see it. And the important thing is you don't see it at all from the front side.
Right.
To the point where you really do think that it might have been a really skilled hand appliquer doing it because the stitches are so small. You'll notice the same thing here. The flower was put in the same way, whereas the leaves, you'll see I used a little buttonhole stitch.
And that was intentional.
It was intentional. That's a choice.
Nice look.
And when it comes to applique, it really is all about what you like and what you love. So if you like to have that look, and I do like to have a variety of looks, this really adds a lot of texture to the leaf. But for the vase, I might not necessarily want to see it.
Right.
So I thought I would show you
take a look at
how I do my invisible applique. So I'm going to work with this one leaf, and I'm going to applique it to this fabric just so you can see. And I'm going to use a hideous bright pink thread so that you can see the stitch. Because in this case, I want you to be able to see it. So when we come over to our machine, move everything out of the way here. Right now our machine's set on a straight stitch, and we're going to change that. We're going to select a stitch that is a blind hem stitch. Now most of the time you would use that for doing a blind hem for your pants.
Right.
We're going to do something a little bit different. And the stitch we're going to use looks like it's a straight stitch, and then it comes down and takes a bite. But it's much bigger proportions than we want. We really want to lower it down. But I'm going to show you what the stitch looks like, just so you can understand the process. So that's the stitch. And every machine has a blind hem stitch. This is not anything new. And you can see it's got a big bite that it's taken in there. So that's not the look we're going for. We're going to change the stitch so it's much closer together. And I'm going to bring it down to the point where it's really close, and then I'm going to narrow it down also, so that when it takes that little bite, it's just going to take the smallest little bite. So watch how the stitch changes.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Can you see what a difference that makes? So it's just taking that one little bite.
Yeah.
Now every machine has different ways of changing it. On Husqvarna Vikings, right now I have the settings, the stitch length is a 7 and the width of it is at a 1. But any place you get into there, you try it and you see if you like it. And as long as you come up with a setting that you like, that's all that's important. There's no right or wrong.
Okay.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to take that stitch. I don't have my glasses on here. And we're going to come down along that edge, and our goal is to keep the edge of that straight stitch close to the edge of the leaf, and then it takes the bite. Now I've made the bite a little bigger than I would normally do, and now it's ready to take the bite.
And you're just taking your time, going around.
I'm taking my time. I wouldn't normally go this slow, but I'm far away from the machine.
Sure.
I don't have my glasses on. And
but still, the point is you go as slowly as you need to get the look you want.
And so when you finish, okay, you can see how it's taken a little bite. Let me get the thread broken off here. You can see how it's taken the bite out of the fabric, but all the stitches are staying on the background fabric.
Right, and it's just enough to hold the applique in place.
And because you have needle turned this, or the raw edges are turned under, the rest of the fabric tends to want to come up above it, and it hides the stitch. So if you look at this really closely, if I pull on this leaf, you'll see where it's taken the 2 bites, and then the straight stitch is running right alongside of it. When I let it go, you can see how it disappears, and that's because the seam allowance has been turned under, so it really kind of comes up and over that stitch.
Right.
I usually match my thread color to whatever the fabric is. If I'm doing a green leaf, I'll have green thread that matches it. I like a 60 weight, nice and light, and then it totally disappears into
right
it.
into it.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. These are great tips. Be sure to check out your machine and see what settings will give you the look that you want when you try this technique at home, but it's definitely something to give a try to because it yields just gorgeous, gorgeous results. Thanks so much for showing these to us. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.